She had always been the kind of student people barely noticed. She sat near the back of the classroom, kept her eyes on her notebook, and spoke only when spoken to. Most days, teachers remembered her face, but not her voice. She never caused trouble. She never asked for attention. She simply did her work and went home. Music class was the only place where she seemed different, though even there she stayed quiet. While other students talked loudly about singers and trends, she listened. She watched the teacher's hands carefully. She wrote notes slowly, as if every word mattered. When it came time to submit assignments, hers were always correct. Not just correct, but detailed. Too detailed for someone who never raised her hand. At first, the teachers felt proud of her. It was nice to see a student take music seriously. When she turned in her first piano recording for a homework task, it sounded clean and smooth. The timing was perfect. The emotion was strong but controlled. The teacher smiled and gave full marks without a second thought. Then came the second recording. And the third, each one sounded better than the last. Not better in a normal way, but better in a way that made people pause. The pieces became harder. The speed increased. The control stayed perfect. There were no mistakes, no slips, no nervous pauses. It sounded like someone who had been playing for many years. Not a student who had never talked about lessons or training. That was when the questions began. In the staff room, during a short break, one teacher mentioned her name. Another nodded slowly. Someone else frowned. "She's very good," one said. "Too good," another replied. They wondered how a student so quiet, so unnoticed, could suddenly submit recordings that sounded professional. Some teachers said talent shows up in different ways. Others were not convinced. They had seen students try to cheat before. They had heard stories of copied recordings and edited audio files. Doubt slowly replaced praise. Instead of asking her directly, they started watching her more closely. In class, they noticed she never played the piano in front of others. When asked to demonstrate simple exercises, she would politely ask to pass. Her hands shook slightly when attention turned toward her. To some teachers, this looked like fear. To others, it looked like guilt. "She avoids playing live," one teacher whispered. "That's strange," another agreed. They decided to test her without telling her. One day, the music teacher asked the class a few questions about piano techniques. Most students answered loudly, guessing or joking. She stayed quiet, eyes down. When the teacher suddenly asked her to explain a difficult concept, she froze. After a moment, she answered softly. The answer was correct. But her voice was barely heard. Some teachers took this as another sign. If she's that good, why can't she speak confidently? Someone said later, what they didn't see was what happened after school. Every day. She went home to a small, quiet space where no one watched her. In one corner of the room stood an old piano. Some keys were chipped. A few made soft clicking sounds. It was not beautiful, but it was hers. She sat there for hours, sometimes until her fingers hurt. She did not play to impress anyone. She played because it was the only place where she felt understood. At school, however, none of that mattered. The teachers continued to talk among themselves. They listened to her recordings again, this time with a critical ear. They searched for signs of editing. They compared her work to online performances. The more they listened, the more confused they became. They could not find clear proof. But their doubt did not disappear. One teacher finally said what others had been thinking. "We need to know if this is real." The decision was made quietly. There would be a live performance. A surprise evaluation. Nothing harsh, nothing humiliating, they told themselves. Just a simple way to confirm the truth. If she was truly that skilled, she would be able to play in person. If not, the truth would come out. No one asked how she might feel when the announcement was made in class. The room filled with noise. Some students groaned. Others laughed. A few felt excited. Live performances meant attention, and attention meant status. She felt something else entirely. Her chest tightened. The teacher explained that a few students would be asked to perform during the next session. No long preparation. No second chances. Just sit and play. Names would be chosen later. She kept her eyes on her desk. hoping her name would not be one of them, but deep down she knew. Over the next few days she felt the weight of invisible eyes. Teachers looked at her longer than usual. Classmates whispered when she walked past. Some smiled kindly. Others smirked, already expecting a failure. No one spoke to her directly, but the message was clear. Something was coming. At home, she tried to practice as usual, but her hands felt heavy. The keys she loved now seemed distant. Her thoughts were loud. What if she froze? What if her fingers slipped? What if they thought she had lied all along? She had never claimed to be special. She had never said she was talented. She had only submitted what was asked of her. The night before the performance, she barely slept. The next day, the music room felt different. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. The piano lid was open. Teachers sat closer than usual, their faces serious. A small group of students filled the room, buzzing with curiosity. Her name was called. For a moment, she did not move. Her legs felt weak. Then she stood, slowly, and walked toward the piano. Each step felt louder than the last. She could feel her heart beating in her ears. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. The room was quiet now. Too quiet, some teachers leaned forward, ready to catch a mistake. Others crossed their arms, certain they already knew the outcome. A few students held their breath, unsure of what they wanted to see. She looked at the keys. This was the moment they had planned. The moment meant to expose her, but as she took a deep breath, something else began to rise inside her. Not confidence, not pride, just familiarity. The same feeling she had every night at home. Alone with the piano, her fingers hovered above the keys, and then, slowly, she pressed the first note. The sound filled the room. Clear and steady. No one spoke. The teachers watched closely. Waiting, they did not yet know that everything they believed was about to change. The first note hung in the air longer than anyone expected. It was not loud, not dramatic, just steady and clear. She pressed the next key, then the next, letting the sound settle before moving on. Her hands no longer shook. They moved the way they always did when no one was watching. A few students shifted in their seats. One teacher tilted their head, listening closely. This was not what they had prepared themselves for. They had expected hesitation, maybe a wrong note, maybe a pause filled with fear. Instead, the melody flowed gently, like it had been waiting to be released. She kept her eyes on the keys, not on the people. The room around her faded. The rows of chairs, the serious faces, the quiet pressure, all of it slipped away. There was only the piano now, only the sound. As the piece grew more complex, something changed in the room. Arms that were once crossed slowly dropped. Pens that were ready to write notes of criticism stayed still. The teachers stopped looking at each other and focused on her hands. She played with care, not rushing, not trying to show off. Each note felt placed with purpose. When the music softened, it felt gentle. When it grew stronger, it carried emotion without force. It did not sound like a student trying to prove something. It sounded like someone telling a story. One student near the back leaned forward without realizing it. Another stopped whispering mid-sentence. Even those who had come hoping to see her fail were now silent. The teachers felt something. It's unfamiliar, creeping in confusion. This was not a trick. They could see her hands clearly. There were no hidden recordings, no devices, no pauses to reset. Every sound came directly from her fingers. Live. Real, as she moved into a faster section. Her hands glided across the keys with confidence. There were no sharp mistakes, no sudden breaks. When she reached a difficult passage, she slowed slightly, then continued smoothly. As if adjusting without panic, one teacher felt their stomach tighten. They remembered every conversation they had in the staff room, every doubt, every whispered suspicion. Another teacher noticed something else. Her face, she was not smiling. She was not showing pride. Her expression was calm, almost distant, as if the audience did not exist. This was not a performance for approval. This was something deeply personal. The music filled the room fully now. It was no longer background sound. It demanded attention. the kind of attention that makes people forget to breathe for a moment. When the final notes approached, the room felt frozen. No one moved. No one dared to cough or shift. Even the air felt still. She played the last chord softly and lifted her hands. The sound faded. Silence followed. For a few seconds, no one reacted. It was not the awkward silence of disappointment. It was something else. A silence filled with realization, then someone clapped. It was hesitant at first. One clap, then another. Slowly, others joined in. The sound grew until the room was filled with applause. Not loud cheering, not shouting, just honest clapping. Your kind that comes when people are unsure how else to respond. She stayed seated, unsure of what to do. Her hands rested in her lap again. She did not look up. Applause had never been the goal. The teacher closest to the piano cleared their throat and thanked her quietly. The words felt small compared to what had just happened. But not everyone felt relief. Some teachers felt embarrassed. Some felt regret. A few still felt uneasy, as if they had missed something important. They began asking questions, careful now, choosing their words. "How long have you been playing?" One asked her. She answered softly. "For a long time. Do you take lessons?" Another asked. She shook her head. No. The teachers exchanged looks. This only added to their disbelief. They asked about her piano at home. She described it simply. Old. Not perfect. Some keys heavier than others. She spoke without drama, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. A teacher asked why she never volunteered to play in class. She hesitated before answering. "I don't like playing in front of people," she said. "I like playing when it's quiet." There was no attitude in her voice. No complaint. Just truth. The room felt different now. The tension that had once been sharp had softened, placed by something heavier, guilt. The teachers dismissed the students, asking her to stay behind for a moment. She nodded, standing slowly, unsure if she had done something wrong. When the room emptied, the teachers spoke more openly. They apologized for putting her under pressure without warning. Some admitted they had doubted her. Others thanked her for proving them wrong. She listened, eyes lowered, unsure how to respond. She was not angry. She was tired. One teacher asked her what music meant to her. She thought for a moment. "It's where I feel safe," she said. That answer stayed with them as she left the room. Word spread quickly through the school. Students talked in hallways. Phones buzzed with messages. The quiet girl from the back of the class was no longer invisible, but attention brought new weight. Later that day, she sat alone during lunch as usual. A few students glanced her way, whispering. Some looked impressed. Some looked curious. A few looked jealous. She kept eating slowly, wishing things could return to normal. At home that evening, she sat at her piano again. The familiar keys greeted her. She played softly, letting the day drain out of her. But something felt different now. The safety of being unknown was slipping away. She wondered what the teachers would do next. Would they expect more performances? More proof? Would music become another place of pressure instead of peace? She did not know that the teachers were having another meeting that same evening. This time, the conversation was different. No accusations. No suspicion. Just questions. What do you do when you discover talent you almost ignored? They knew one thing for sure. The attempt to expose her had failed. Instead, it had revealed something none of them were prepared for. And this was only the beginning. The days after the performance did not slow down. If anything, everything moved faster than she was ready for. Teachers smiled at her in the hallways now. Some nodded with respect. Others stopped her to ask small questions, as if trying to understand her better. She answered politely every time, but inside, she felt the same quiet discomfort. She had never wanted to be seen. In music class, things changed the most. The teacher asked her to sit closer to the piano. Other students looked at her differently now. Some were curious, some impressed, some unsure how to talk to her. A few tried to start conversations, asking how long she had been playing or where she learned. She replied with short answers and gentle smiles, hoping the attention would fade, but it didn't. The teachers wanted to know more. They asked about her home, her routine, her past. During a private meeting, one teacher gently asked how she had learned to play so well without lessons. She took a moment before speaking. "I listened," she said. "A lot." She explained that when she was younger, music had been one of the few steady things in her life. She had found comfort in sounds, in patterns, in the way melodies repeated and changed. When she discovered the old piano at home, she treated it like a friend. She learned by listening to recordings, watching hands on screens, and trying again and again until it felt right. There were no shortcuts. Only time, some nights, she practiced until her fingers ached. Other nights she played slowly, repeating the same few notes until they felt honest. She never thought of it as training. It was simply something she did. The teachers listened carefully. For the first time, they saw the person behind the performance. Not a mystery to solve, but a student who had grown quietly through patience and love for music. They also began to realize something. It's uncomfortable. They had almost taken this away from her in their effort to catch a mistake. They had created fear. In their doubt, they had put pressure on something pure. The thought stayed with them longer than they expected. Meanwhile, her classmates struggled to understand her. A few assumed she was hiding secrets on purpose. Others thought she must feel proud. But she felt neither. She felt tired. The piano, once her escape, now carried expectations. One afternoon, after school, she stayed behind in the music room alone. She sat at the piano without playing. The silence felt heavy. For the first time in years, she wondered if she should stop. She rested her hands on the keys, but didn't press them. That was when a teacher entered quietly and sat in the back without saying a word. They didn't ask her to play. They didn't ask questions. They simply waited. After a long moment, she began to play something simple, not a complex piece. Just a soft melody she had known for years. The notes were gentle, uneven in places, full of feeling rather than perfection. When she finished, the teacher spoke softly. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. The words surprised her, for the first time since the performance. She felt her shoulders relax. As weeks passed, new opportunities were mentioned. A school concert, a local event, a chance to perform again. The teachers spoke with excitement, but also caution. They made sure to ask her first this time. They made sure she knew she could say no. She said no to most of them, not because she lacked confidence, but because she needed time. Time to understand what music meant to her now that it was no longer hidden. At home, she returned to her old piano. The chipped keys, the soft clicks, the familiar imperfections. She played without thinking about grades or opinions. Slowly, the joy returned. Her family noticed the change too. They had always known she loved music, but they had never heard her talk about school this much. She shared small details, never exaggerating, never complaining. Just telling them how strange it felt to be noticed. They reminded her that the piano had been hers long before anyone else cared. At school, the teachers continued to talk. This time, about responsibility. About how easily quiet students could be misunderstood. About how talent does not always come with confidence or noise. They began changing small things. Giving space. Listening more. Watching less. One teacher admitted privately that they had been wrong. Another said they had learned more from her than she might ever know. She did not hear all of these conversations, but she felt the difference. The pressure eased. The room felt safer. Still, the memory of that first performance stayed with her. The fear, the silence, the way her hands had hovered over the keys before the first note. She knew she could not go back to being invisible. But she also knew she did not want to become something Wells' music was not a stage for her. It was a language. A place where she could say things she could never explain out loud. As the semester moved on, she agreed to one small performance. Not for a crowd, just for a few students who genuinely wanted to learn. She played slowly, explaining nothing. Letting the sound speak, They listened differently than before, not as judges, but as learners. And for the first time since, the teachers tried to expose her. She felt something close to balance. She did not know what the future would bring. She did not know if music would stay private or become public. But she knew one thing: whatever happened next, it would be on her terms, and that made all the difference. Life did not return to what it was, but it also did not become overwhelming right away. Instead, it changed slowly in small moments that added up over time. The teachers became more careful with her, almost gentle. They no longer spoke around her as if she were a problem to solve. They spoke to her, asking what she felt comfortable with and what she did not. One afternoon, the music teacher asked if she would like to help during class. Not to perform, not to lead, just to sit nearby while others practiced. She agreed, unsure what that meant. She watched as students struggled with simple rhythms, missed notes, and laughed at their own mistakes. For the first time, she saw music from the other side. A student near the piano asked her quietly how she kept her hands so relaxed. She showed them slowly, without words. Just movement. Just patience. The student nodded, surprised at how simple it felt. Word spread, not in a loud way, but in a steady one. Students who truly cared about music began seeking her out. Not to test her, but to learn. She never corrected anyone sharply. She never acted superior. She remembered how hard it was to start. The teachers noticed this too. They saw how she listened more than she spoke, how she waited instead of rushing, how she understood that mistakes were part of the process, not something to fear. They began to trust her in a new way. Still, there were moments that tested her. A school event was approaching. Nothing big, just a small gathering where students could share talents. The idea of her playing came up again. This time, it was not whispered. It was discussed openly, carefully, when they asked her. They made it clear there was no pressure. She went home that day feeling torn. Part of her wanted to say no and protect the quiet world she had rebuilt. Another part wondered if hiding forever would slowly turn into regret. She sat at her piano late into the night, playing softly. The notes felt familiar, comforting. She thought about the first time teachers had doubted her. The fear she had felt. The way the music had still carried her through. By morning, she had made a decision she would play, but not to impress, only to share the day of the event arrived. The room was modest, filled with chairs and simple decorations. No stage lights. No grand introductions. Just students, teachers, and families sitting together. When her turn came, there was polite applause. Not excitement. Not pressure. Just acknowledgement. She walked to the piano slowly, the same way she always did. Her hands hovered for a moment, as they had before. But this time, the fear was smaller. The silence felt kinder. She played a piece she loved. Not the hardest one. Not the one that showed the most skill. The one that reminded her why she started. The music filled the room gently. People leaned in without realizing it. Conversations stopped. Phones were lowered. The sound asked for attention without demanding it. Some teachers felt a tightness in their chest. They remembered the suspicion, the doubt, the moment they tried to expose her. Now, they saw the cost of that moment and the gift that followed. When she finished, the applause was warmer than before. Still calm, still respectful, but filled with something new. Understanding after the event. People thanked her quietly. A parent said their child wanted to practice more after listening to her. A teacher said the school felt different now. She smiled politely and went home. At home she played again, just for herself. The piano sounded the same. The keys felt the same. That mattered to her. Over the following weeks, small opportunities appeared. A recommendation letter. An invitation to observe a rehearsal outside of school. A chance to meet people who lived and breathed music. The teachers guided her carefully, making sure nothing felt forced. They asked before suggesting. They listened when she hesitated. They had learned. One teacher admitted something important during a quiet conversation. "We almost lost something special," they said. "Not because it wasn't real, but because we didn't understand it." She did not respond right away. Then she said, "It's okay." And she meant it. Forgiveness did not come from forgetting. It came from choosing not to carry the weight anymore. At school, the atmosphere shifted. Quiet students were treated differently now. Teachers asked more questions before making assumptions. They paid attention to those who stayed silent. Her story, without being told loudly, changed things. She still sat near the back sometimes. She still liked quiet. But she no longer felt invisible. Music had become something shared. Not taken from her, not pushed onto her. As the year moved toward its end, she felt stronger. Not louder, not bolder, just steadier. She knew the final chapter of this journey was coming. Though she didn't yet know what it would look like, what she did know was this: the attempt to expose her had turned into something else entirely. Respect, and that changed everything. The last weeks of the school year arrived quietly. There were no big announcements, no sudden changes. Life moved forward in small, steady steps. It's the kind that feel ordinary until you look back and realize how far you've come. She continued going to class like everyone else. She still listened more than she spoke. She still preferred the back of the room. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt the need to shrink herself to stay safe. She had learned that being quiet did not mean being weak. The piano remained her anchor. Some afternoons, she practiced alone at school. Other times, she chose the comfort of her old piano at home. The chipped keys still welcomed her the same way they always had. No judgment. No expectations. Just sound and space. The teachers watched her with a different kind of care now. They didn't hover. They didn't push. They trusted her to choose her own pace. In meetings, they spoke about growth, not pressure. About listening, not control. One teacher suggested she consider applying for a music program outside of school. They handed her the paper gently, as if it were an invitation, not a demand. They told her she could decide later. She took the paper home and placed it on her desk. For days, she didn't look at it. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to be sure. Music had always been her private world. Opening it to others felt like opening a window she had kept closed for years. One evening, she sat at the piano and played until the sun disappeared. The room grew dark, but she kept going, letting the notes guide her thoughts. She remembered the first time she had touched the keys, the nights she played quietly so no one would hear, the fear she felt when teachers doubted her. She also remembered the moment she chose to play. Anyway, that memory mattered. The next morning, she picked up the paper. She didn't rush. She read every word carefully. The program wasn't about competition or fame. It was about learning, about growth, about music as a craft. That made it feel right. She decided to apply. The process was slow and calm. No drama, no rush. Just forms, recordings, and a short written note about why music mattered to her. She wrote honestly, using simple words. She didn't try to impress anyone. While waiting for a response, she focused on finishing the school year. Exams came and went. Classrooms emptied. Lockers were cleaned out. On the final day, the music teacher asked her to stay back for a moment. They thanked her, not just for her talent, but for her patience. For teaching them something they hadn't realized they needed to learn. Sometimes the teacher said, "We forget that quiet doesn't mean empty." She nodded, understanding more than she could explain. When she left the school that day, she didn't look back. Not because she wanted to forget it, but because she didn't need to carry it with her anymore. At home, summer settled in gently. Mornings were slow. Evenings were quiet. She played when she felt like it and rested when she didn't. Music returned to being a choice. It's not an expectation. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. She held it for a long moment before opening it. She had been accepted. The words didn't make her jump or shout. She sat down instead. She read the letter twice, then placed it beside the piano. She played softly, letting the sound settle the feeling in her chest. She thought about the teachers who once tried to expose her, about how close they came to breaking something fragile. about how things could have gone differently, but they didn't because she chose to, reserved herself, and because they chose to learn. As time passed, her story didn't become a headline or a rumor. It became something quieter and more lasting. Teachers remembered it when another silent student sat at the back of the room. Students remembered it when they doubted themselves. She became proof that talent doesn't always arrive loudly, that it doesn't always ask to be seen. Sometimes it just waits. When she finally stepped into her new program, she carried no bitterness with her, only gratitude. For the piano that never judged her, for the silence that shaped her, for the moment she found her voice without speaking. She was no longer the student teachers tried to expose. She was the musician they discovered, and more importantly, the one who discovered herself. The piano keys moved under her fingers as they always had, steady, honest, true. And this time, the world listened. The new place felt unfamiliar at first. The rooms were larger. The walls covered with old photos and quiet reminders of people who had walked similar paths before her. Pianos lined the halls, each one different, each one carrying its own history. She moved through the space slowly, taking everything in without rushing. No, one knew her story here. That thought brought her comfort. She was no longer the quiet student who had been doubted. She was simply a learner again, someone at the beginning, not the end. The teachers here did not watch her with suspicion or surprise. They listened. They asked questions. They expected effort, not perfection. In her first lesson, she sat at the piano and waited. The instructor did not tell her to play anything difficult. Instead, they asked her to play something she loved. She chose a simple piece. As she played, she felt the familiar calm return. The room was quiet in a respectful way, not a tense one. When she finished, the instructor nodded and said, "You listened carefully." Yeah, that was all. No praise. No pressure. It felt right. Days turned into weeks. Her routine settled. Practice in the morning. Classes in the afternoon. Long walks in between. She met other students, each carrying their own fears and hopes. Some were confident. Some were nervous. Some were loud. Some were quiet like her. For the first time, being quiet did not make her different. She learned new techniques slowly. Some challenged her. Some frustrated her. She made mistakes openly now, without shame. She learned that even those who seemed confident struggled to music, felt larger here. Not louder, but deeper. Sometimes, late in the evening, she stayed behind to practice alone. The building grew quiet, and the sounds of other instruments faded away. In those moments, she remembered her old piano at home. The chipped keys. The soft clicks. The place where everything had started. She wrote home often, sharing small details. Not achievements. Just feelings. How the air felt. How the halls sounded. How music was slowly becoming something shared rather than hidden. Back at her old school, life continued. Teachers remembered her when planning lessons. They paused before doubting. They watched for talent that didn't announce itself. The story of the quiet student who proved them wrong stayed alive. Not as gossip, but as a lesson. Students who struggled found comfort in that story. Some began practicing more. Others simply felt seen. She didn't know all of this was happening. She was busy learning. One afternoon, she was asked to play during a small gathering. Not a performance, just a moment to share progress. Her heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear this time. It was excitement mixed with nerves. She played honestly, not perfectly. When she finished, there was no loud applause, just smiles. A few thoughtful nods. Someone said the music felt sincere. That mattered more than praise ever had. As time passed, she understood something important. The teachers who once tried to expose her were not villains. They were people who had made a mistake. People who learned, and she had learned too. She learned that silence can hold strength, that doubt can become fuel, that talent does not need permission to exist. One evening, she sat at a piano near a window. The city lights glowed softly outside. She played without thinking about the past or the future. Just the sound. Just the moment. She smiled, not because she had proven anything, but because she finally felt free. Her journey did not end with discovery. It continued with growth, with patience, with trust in herself. The teachers who once tried to expose her had discovered something unexpected. So, had she, and that discovery would stay with her long. After the music faded, time moved in a quiet way after that. Not fast, not slow, just steady. She settled deeper into her routine, learning to balance effort and rest, focus and patience. Each day did not feel important on its own, but together they shaped her in ways she only noticed later. She began to understand that growth did not always come from big moments. Most of it came from small choices, showing up even when she felt tired, practicing a difficult passage again instead of avoiding it, listening closely to feedback without letting it hurt. There were days when doubt returned. Some lessons felt heavy. Some pieces felt impossible. On those days, she reminded herself why she had started. Not to be praised, not to be discovered, but because music made sense when nothing else did. She spent more time listening now. To others' play, to how different hands touched the same keys in different ways. Everyone had their own sound, their own story. That made her feel less alone. One evening after a long practice session, she sat quietly while another student played. The music was messy, full of mistakes, but also full of feeling. She felt something shift inside her. Perfection was not the goal. Honesty was. She carried that thought with her. As months passed, she was asked to help newer students who felt lost. Not officially. Just small moments. Sitting beside them, showing a fingering, offering a calm word. She saw herself in them, the nervous hands, the fear of being judged, the quiet hope that someone would understand. She became that someone. Back at her old school, the changes lasted. Teachers spoke differently now. They gave space to quiet voices. They listened longer before deciding. The story of the girl who almost lost her music stayed alive, not as a warning, but as guidance. Students who never raised their hands felt a little safer. That mattered more than any award one day. She received a message from a teacher she once feared. The words were simple. They thanked her again, not for the performance, but for the lesson she had taught without meaning to. She read the message slowly. She smiled. There was no anger left. No need to reopen old wounds. Only understanding. She realized then that forgiveness had given her freedom. Carrying resentment would have kept her tied to the past. Letting go allowed her to move forward. Music continued to shape her days. Some pieces challenged her technically. Others challenged her emotionally. She learned that both mattered. She learned to rest. She learned to breathe. She learned that silence was not something to escape, but something to respect. One late night, she sat alone at a piano and played without stopping. The building was empty. The lights were low. The sound echoed softly around her. She felt grounded, not because she had reached a goal, but because she was exactly where she needed to be. Her journey was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about staying true to herself, about protecting the quiet part of her that loved music before anyone noticed. She understood now that being seen was not the same as being understood, and understanding took time. As she closed the piano lid and prepared to leave, she looked back once more. Not with doubt, not with fear, with gratitude. The teachers who once tried to expose her had started something they never expected. They had helped her discover her strength, and she carried that strength forward, one quiet note at a time. The world outside continued to change, but her relationship with music stayed steady. It was no longer something fragile that could be taken away by doubt or misunderstanding. It had grown roots, deep ones. She learned to live with uncertainty. Some days were clear and focused. Other days felt slow and confusing, but she stopped seeing those days as failures. They were simply part of the path. Music was no longer a shield she hid behind. It became a bridge. She began noticing how people reacted when she played. Not with shock or surprise, but with calm attention. They listened differently now. She did too. She listened to the room, to the pauses between notes, to the way silence carried meaning. One afternoon, during a break, a younger student sat beside her. They didn't speak at first. After a long moment, the student said quietly that they were afraid of being judged. She understood. She didn't give advice. She didn't tell a story. She simply played a few notes, slow and gentle. The student watched her hands and breathed easier. Sometimes that was enough. She realized then that her journey was no longer only hers. Without trying, she had become a quiet guide for others who felt unseen. Back home, her family noticed the change in her voice. She spoke a little more now. Not louder, just clearer. Music had given her that she still returned to her old piano whenever she could. The chipped keys reminded her where she came from, the place where no one watched, where mistakes were allowed, where sound was honest. She never wanted to forget that. At times, memories of the past returned. The fear, the doubt, the moment teachers questioned her honesty. But those memories no longer hurt. They felt distant, like shadows at the edge of a brighter room. She understood something important. Pain does not disappear. It changes shape, and sometimes it becomes strength. She continued learning, not chasing success, but seeking understanding. She explored different styles, different emotions. Some pieces challenged her hands. Others challenged her heart. She welcomed both. One evening, during a small gathering, she was asked to play again. She agreed without hesitation, not because she needed approval, but because she wanted to share something real. She played slowly. The music did not rush. It spoke in quiet sentences when she finished. The room stayed silent for a moment, not from shock, but from respect. That silence felt like home. Later that night, she walked alone under the open sky. She thought about the path behind her, the misunderstanding, the test. The moment she chose to play, instead of hide, she smiled softly. Not because everything had been easy, but because it had been honest. She knew now that being discovered was never the point, being understood was, and understanding begins when people choose to listen. The teachers who once tried to expose her had listened, so had she. Her story did not end with applause or praise. It continued quietly, shaped by patience, humility, and love for the sound that had always been there. She placed her hands on the piano one more time that night and played a simple melody, the same way she always had. Not to prove anything, just to be herself. And in that moment, she knew something with certainty. No matter where life took her, music would remain her. True. Steady, gentle, unbreakable. The years that followed did not arrive with noise or sudden change. They unfolded quietly, the way meaningful things often do. She continued walking her path with care, never rushing, never forcing herself into places that didn't feel right. Music stayed close to her, like a steady companion. Some days it challenged her. Other days it comforted her. She learned to accept both without resistance. She understood now that growth was not about always moving forward, but about staying honest with where you were. She began to notice how differently she listened to the world. Everyday sounds felt sharper. Footsteps, voices, wind moving through trees. Music had taught her to pay attention, and that attention spilled into everything else. When she played, she no longer thought about skill or technique first. She thought about meaning. What did the music want to say? What did she feel when she heard it? Those questions mattered more than speed or complexity. People who heard her play often described it in the same way. They said it felt calm. They said it felt real. Some said it reminded them of things they couldn't explain. She took those words quietly and let them pass. Praise no longer defined her. She had learned what doubt felt like. She had survived it. She had grown beyond it. That knowledge stayed with her in a deep, steady way. From time to time, she returned to her old school, not as a performer, not as someone special, just as someone who cared. She sat in classrooms and listened. She watched students who reminded her of herself years ago, the quiet ones. She paid attention to them when she spoke. She spoke gently. She told them that it was okay to take time. That learning did not have to be loud. That silence could hold strength. Teachers listened to. They remembered the mistake they had almost made. They remembered how close they came to breaking something precious. That memory guided them now. Her story became part of the school's culture, though it was never announced or written on a wall. It lived in small choices, in patience, in listening, in giving students room to grow. She did not need recognition for that. Knowing it mattered was enough at home. The old piano still stood in the corner. It had not changed. The keys were still worn. Some sounds still clicked softly. She returned to it whenever life felt heavy. She played without thinking, without planning, just sound meeting silence. In those moments, she felt complete. She thought sometimes about the day teachers tried to expose her, the fear she had felt, the pressure, the choice she made to sit down and play anyway. That moment no longer felt painful. It felt necessary, because without it, she might never have understood her own strength. She learned that courage does not always look bold. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet and still choosing to be honest. Her journey did not end with a single discovery. It continued in small, unseen ways. In the way she taught, in the way she listened, in the way she played, music remained her truth. Not something she owned, something she lived. And as time passed, she understood the most important lesson of all. They tried to expose her talent, but what they truly revealed was her character. The piano never changed who she was. It simply allowed her to be seen, and that was enough.